The massive alien ship descended through the clouds of Kepler 442b, like a metal mountain falling from the sky. Ji-ho Kim wiped the sweat from his forehead and watched through the grimy window of the atmospheric processing station where he worked. The Coalition recruitment vessel was bigger than anything he had ever seen, its hull gleaming with strange symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. "Another conscription run," muttered his supervisor, a grizzled man named Taman. "Been running the station for 15 years. Third one this month. The war must be going badly." Ji-ho nodded but said nothing. He had heard the reports filtering through human space about the Void Swarm, an enemy so terrible that the mighty Galactic Coalition was reduced to scraping conscripts from every inhabited world they could find. Even backwater colonies like theirs were not safe from the recruitment drives. The communication system crackled to life with the harsh, translated voice of an alien commander. "All able-bodied sentients between the ages of 18 and 45 are required to report to landing Zone Alpha for military evaluation. This is not optional. Failure to comply will result in orbital bombardment of your settlement." Ji-ho looked at the photo on his workstation. His sister Minji smiled back at him from the frame, her graduation cap slightly crooked as she posed with her engineering degree. She was working on Mars now, designing atmospheric systems for the growing colonies there. She was safe, at least for now. "You're not thinking of volunteering, are you?" Taman asked, noticing Ji-ho's expression. "Someone has to go," Ji-ho replied, quietly. "If they don't get enough volunteers, they'll start taking people by force." 3 hours later, Ji-ho stood in a line with 200 other humans from the colony. The recruitment station had been set up in the main cargo bay of the alien ship, and the sight of it made his stomach turn. Beings from across the galaxy waited in separate groups, each species more terrifying than the last. The Gorak warriors stood nearly 3 meters tall, their thick gray skin covered in natural armor plates. Their arms were as thick as Ji-ho's entire body, and their faces looked like they had been carved from stone by an angry sculptor. When they spoke, their voices rumbled like distant thunder. The Velthari moved like liquid shadows, their elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Their eyes were compound like an insect's, taking in everything around them with disturbing intensity. Even standing still, they seemed ready to pounce on anything that moved wrong. The stone claws were living rocks, their bodies made of some kind of mineral that gleamed dully under the harsh lights. They stood perfectly motionless, and Ji-ho wondered if they were even breathing. When one of them shifted position, the sound was like grinding stone. And then there was General Vex single quotes. Thor. The Krikstani commander stood on a raised platform overlooking the recruitment area, his obsidian gleaming like black metal. He had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could probably tear through steel plating. His head was elongated and insect-like, with mandibles that clicked constantly as he observed the new arrivals. When he moved, it was with the deadly grace of a predator that had never known fear. "Pathetic." The general's voice boomed across the cargo bay, amplified by translation devices. "Look at what the Coalition has been reduced to recruiting. Half-evolved mammals, barely sentient rock creatures, and whatever these pale things are. Supposed to be." His gaze swept over the human contingent with obvious disgust. Ji-ho felt the weight of that alien stare and forced himself to stand straighter. Around him, other humans shifted nervously under the general's attention. "You Vexter," pointed one of his 4 arms directly at Ji-ho. "Step forward." Ji-ho's heart hammered in his chest, but he walked forward until he stood directly below the general's platform. Up close, Vexter was even more intimidating. The alien's compound eyes reflected the light like black mirrors, and his mandibles dripped with some kind of acidic saliva. "What is your designation?" "Creature." "Ji-ho Kim." "Sir." "Atmospheric technician, 2nd class." Vexter's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Atmospheric technician? And what makes you think a maintenance worker can serve in the Coalition military?" "I volunteered, sir." "Volunteered." The general's voice carried across the entire cargo bay now, drawing attention from every species present. "You volunteered to die in a war against enemies that consume entire star systems." Ji-ho met the alien's terrifying gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Ji-ho thought about Minji, safe on Mars. For now, he thought about the other colonists back on the surface, families who deserved to live without fear. He thought about all the human worlds scattered across the galaxy, small and weak compared to the great alien civilizations, but still home to billions of people who had never asked for this war. "Because someone has to stand up," he said simply. "General." Vexter stared down at the small human for what felt like an eternity. Then his mandibles clicked again, and he turned away dismissively. "Assign it to the expendable units," he ordered his aide. "If it wants to die so badly, we might as well let it serve as a distraction while real soldiers do the fighting." As Ji-ho was processed and assigned his bunk number, he caught sight of another human in a Coalition uniform. She was older, with lieutenant's bars on her collar, and she watched him with interest. Her name tag read S. Han in Coalition Standard. Script. The ship's engines began to hum as they prepared to depart for the training facility. Ji-ho looked out through a porthole at his homeworld, shrinking below them. He had no idea what awaited him at the Coalition training base. But he knew one thing for certain. General Vexter had just made his first mistake about humans. He had assumed that being small meant being weak. Soon, he would learn otherwise. The training grounds of Coalition Base Sigma 7 were designed to break weak soldiers and forge the survivors into weapons of war. Under the blazing heat of twin suns, recruits from dozens of species pushed their bodies beyond normal limits. The gravity on this world was twice what Ji-ho was used to, making every step feel like he was carrying another person on his back. General Vexter stood on his observation platform, his forearms crossed as he watched the morning exercises with growing irritation. His compound eyes kept finding the same pathetic figure, struggling through every drill. The human was like a broken piece of equipment that somehow kept functioning despite being completely inadequate for its purpose. Attention, recruits, Vexter's voice boomed across the training field. Today, we begin strength assessment. Each of you will lift the standard training weights. Failure to meet minimum requirements will result in reassignment to labor duties. The Gorak warriors stepped forward first, their massive arms easily hoisting weights that would crush most beings. 200 kilograms felt like nothing to them. They grunted with satisfaction as they completed their sets, their stone-like faces showing no strain. The Velthari were next, their lean bodies deceptively strong. They moved the weights with fluid grace, their compound eyes never leaving the general's platform as they sought approval. Even the Stoneclaws, despite their slow movements, lifted the training weights without difficulty. Then came Ji-ho's turn. The human approached the weight station with obvious reluctance. His pale hands gripped the lifting bars, and his knees bent. As he tried to raise the 200-kilogram load, his face turned red with effort, veins standing out on his forehead, but the weight barely moved off the ground. "Stop," Vexter commanded, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. His platform descended to ground level, bringing him face to face with the struggling human. "This is exactly what I expected from your species." Ji-ho straightened up, his chest heaving from the failed attempt. Sweat dripped from his hair, but his dark eyes remained steady as he looked up at the towering general. "Tell me, little mammal," Vexter continued, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "What is the heaviest object you can lift?" "About 50 kilograms, Sir," Ji-ho replied honestly. The other recruits began to laugh. The sound was a mixture of rumbling Gorak voices, chittering Velthari clicks, and grinding Stoneclaw vibrations. Even some of the alien instructors shook their heads in disbelief. 50 kilograms, Vexter repeated, making sure everyone could hear. "A Gorak child can lift more than that. A damaged maintenance robot has more strength than this creature." He gestured with one of his forearms toward the other recruits. "Look around you, human. Do you see what real soldiers look like? Do you understand how pathetic you appear in comparison?" Ji-ho nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I understand that I'm weaker than everyone else here." "Then why are you wasting our time?" Vexter demanded. "Why should the Coalition spend resources training something so obviously inferior?" The question hung in the air. Ji-ho could feel dozens of alien eyes watching him, waiting for him to break down or beg for mercy. Instead, he took a deep breath and met the general's terrifying gaze, because being the weakest doesn't mean being useless, sir. Vexter's mandibles clicked faster, a sign of growing anger among his species. "Explain." "The atmospheric processors I maintained back home weighed over 500 tons, Ji-ho said calmly. "I couldn't lift them, but I could fix them when they broke." "Sometimes the most important job isn't about being the strongest. This is a military unit, not a repair shop," Vexter roared. "Combat requires strength, speed, and killing power. What can you possibly contribute to a battle?" Ji-ho was quiet for a moment, thinking. Around him, the other recruits waited for his answer with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. "I don't know yet, sir," he finally admitted, "but I'm willing to find out." The honest answer seemed to infuriate Vexter even more. For the next 3 weeks, he made Ji-ho the example of everything wrong with the Coalition's desperate recruitment policies. During combat drills, he paired the human against opponents twice his size and strength. When Ji-ho inevitably lost, Vexter would halt the entire exercise to point out his failures. "Observe how the human falls when struck by a Gorak fist," the general would announce. "Notice how his soft flesh bruises and tears. This is what happens when inferior species attempt to play soldier." During endurance runs, Ji-ho always finished last, his lungs burning in the thin atmosphere, while other species barely seemed winded. During weapons training, his small hands struggled to grip rifles designed for larger beings. Every day brought fresh humiliation as he failed to meet standards that seemed impossible for his biology. But something was happening that General Vexter failed to notice. After the official training ended each day, when other recruits rested or socialized, Ji-ho remained on the training grounds. He studied the equipment with the careful attention of an engineer, looking for ways to adapt the standard procedures to work with his limitations. When brute force failed, he experimented with leverage and technique. When speed wasn't enough, he focused on efficiency and precision. Late one evening, Instructor Thaxwin found Jiho in the weapons maintenance bay, carefully disassembling a coalition rifle with steady, practiced hands. "Why do you continue this pointless struggle, human?" the Velthari asked, his compound eyes reflecting genuine curiosity. "Even your own species would not blame you for requesting transfer to support duties." Jiho looked up from his work, his hands never pausing in their task. "My sister always said that the hardest problems require the most creative solutions," he replied. "Maybe being different isn't the same as being wrong." Neither of them noticed Lieutenant Sujin Han, the human aide to General Vexter, watching from the doorway with a knowing smile. She had seen this determination before, and she knew that Vexter was about to learn a very important lesson about underestimating humans. The real test was coming soon. The attack came in the deepest part of the night, when most of the base was asleep. Jiho woke to the sound of alarms screaming through the metal corridors of Coalition Base Sigma 7. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, making the familiar barracks look like the inside of a nightmare. "All personnel to combat stations. This is not a drill." General Vexter's voice boomed over the communication system. "The Void Swarm has found us." Jiho rolled out of his bunk as chaos erupted around him. The massive Gorak warriors who had seemed so confident during training now stumbled in confusion, their thick armor clanking as they tried to grab weapons with shaking hands. The swift Velthari darted back and forth like frightened insects, their compound eyes wide with terror that in reality tore open in the center of the barracks. The air split like fabric, revealing a hole in space that hurt to look at directly. Through the tear stepped something that should not have existed. The void entity was beautiful and horrible at the same time, like a living crystal made of pure darkness. It absorbed the red emergency lights, making the shadows deeper and colder. Where the creature touched the metal floor, corrosion spread like a disease. The air around it shimmered with energy that made Jiho's teeth ache. This was what had been destroying entire star systems across the galaxy, and now it was here, in their barracks, close enough to reach out and touch. Standard weapons ineffective. Corporal Thaxwin's voice cracked over the squad communication system. "Repeat, standard weapons have no effect." Fall back to his transmission, cut to static, as the void entity drained the power from his radio equipment. Around Jiho trained, soldiers panicked. The Gorak warrior named Groktar, who had laughed at the human's weakness just hours before, now stood frozen in terror as his natural armor began to crack and crumble just from being near the entity. The Velthari scouts tried to use their speed to escape, but the creature moved through space in ways that made normal physics meaningless. In the corner of the barracks, 3 wounded Stoneclaw recruits lay trapped behind an overturned bunk. Their rocky skin, which could stop most weapons in the galaxy, was dissolving like sand wherever the entity's energy touched them. They tried to crawl away, but their heavy bodies moved too slowly. Jiho's mind shifted into the calm focus that had kept him alive during countless dangerous repairs in the outer colonies. Panic killed faster than any equipment failure. He had learned that lesson while fixing atmospheric processors in the vacuum of space, where one wrong move meant death for an entire colony. His eyes scanned the barracks with the systematic attention of an engineer looking for solutions. The void entity was moving toward the trapped Stoneclaws, its crystalline form pulsing with dark energy. In seconds, those soldiers would be dead. Jiho spotted what he needed. Emergency power couplings lined the walls, designed to reroute electricity during system failures. Training charges used for demolition exercises were stored in a nearby weapons locker. His hands moved with the steady precision of someone who had spent years working with dangerous equipment. "Everyone get down and grab onto something solid," he shouted as he connected the power coupling to a handful of training charges. "What are you doing?" Groktar demanded, his voice high with fear. "Something stupid," Jiho replied, his fingers working quickly to jury-rig a feedback loop into the barracks. Artificial gravity generator. He had no idea if his plan would work. The void entities seemed to ignore most physical laws, but they had to follow some rules, or they wouldn't be able to exist in normal space. If he could create enough gravitational interference, maybe he could disrupt whatever force kept the creature stable. The gravity field began to fluctuate wildly. Equipment not bolted down started floating toward the ceiling, then crashed back to the floor as the field reversed. The emergency lights flickered as power rerouted through Jiho's improvised device. The void entity, which had been moving steadily toward the trapped Stoneclaws, suddenly stopped. Its crystalline form began to vibrate, dark energy crackling around its edges like lightning. The creature that had seemed unstoppable was now struggling against conflicting gravitational forces that pulled it in different directions at once. "It's working," Groktar shouted in amazement. The entity's form began to break apart as the gravitational shear tore at its structure. With a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind, it dispersed into harmless particles of light that faded into nothing. In the sudden silence that followed, a dozen alien faces stared at Jiho in shock. The human was still kneeling by the improvised device, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "How did you know that would work?" asked Zixara, one of the Velthari scouts who had previously ignored him completely. Helped the wounded Stoneclaws to their feet, his small hands surprisingly gentle as he checked them for injuries. "I didn't know," he admitted, "but I've learned that doing something is usually better than doing nothing." More alarms began sounding throughout the base. The entity in their barracks had been just the beginning. Through the walls, they could hear the sounds of battle echoing from other sections of the facility. Explosions, screaming, and the horrible sound of reality being torn apart. "The main assault is just starting," Jiho said quietly, looking toward the door. "And I don't think the standard military tactics are going to work against these things." Grokta, who had spent weeks mocking the human's weakness, now looked at him with something approaching respect. "What do we do?" Jiho picked up a damaged communication device and began working to repair it with quick, efficient movements. "We adapt," he said simply. "We figure out what these creatures can't do, and we use that against them." Outside, the real battle was about to begin. The battle for Coalition Base Sigma 7 raged for 18 hours without stopping. The Void Swarm had turned the military facility into a nightmare maze where reality itself could not be trusted. Walls dissolved under alien touch, gravity worked in reverse, and the screams of dying soldiers echoed through corridors that sometimes led to empty space. Instead of other rooms, in Sector 7, a mixed group of recruits and instructors had barricaded themselves behind overturned equipment and broken machinery. Corporal Faxwin lay unconscious against a wall, his nervous system overloaded after getting too close to a void entity. The ranking Gorak sergeant had suffered a complete mental breakdown when his natural aggression made the creatures stronger, instead of weaker, without any clear chain of command. The survivors looked around at each other in confusion and growing panic. That was when Jiho stepped forward. "Hyenwu, can you get power to the shield generators?" He called to another human who had been assigned to maintenance duties before the attack. Hyenwu looked up from a jury-rigged control panel, his hands covered in grease and sparks flying around his fingers. "I can give you maybe 10 minutes of partial shielding, but the power grid is failing everywhere." Jiho nodded and turned to face the group of alien soldiers. Many of them were twice his size and possessed natural weapons that could tear him apart without effort, yet they waited for his instructions. The situation was too desperate for anyone to worry about species hierarchy. "Listen carefully," Jiho said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had managed emergency situations before. "These void entities feed on different types of energy, emotional energy, electrical energy, biological energy. The more we fight them, the normal way, the stronger they become." A Velthari scout named Zixara clicked her mandibles nervously. "But they phase through solid matter and drain life force directly. How can we possibly fight something like that?" "By not fighting them," Jiho replied. "I've been watching their behavior patterns. When they're draining energy, they become solid and can't phase through walls. When they're phasing, they can't drain anything. They also seem to have trouble when exposed to rapid frequency changes." He began sketching a rough diagram on the wall using emergency chalk. "Hyenwu's power work isn't just for shields. If we can create electromagnetic pulses at different frequencies throughout this sector, we can keep the entities destabilized while we evacuate the wounded." Groktar, the massive Gorak warrior, who had once mocked Jiho's weakness, shook his head in disbelief. "That could overload every system in this entire section of the base." "Better than letting everyone die," Jiho replied without hesitation. What followed was the strangest military operation in Coalition history. Jiho coordinated teams that had never worked together before, using each species' natural advantages. While finding ways around their limitations, the Stoneclaws, with their natural resistance to energy drain, became perfect for getting close to the entities and placing equipment. The Velthar used their speed to run cables and components between safe areas. The Gorak warriors used their strength to move heavy machinery into defensive positions. Most importantly, Jiho never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. When a critical relay needed to be installed in a corridor filled with void entities, he went personally, trusting the others to cover him with their improvised frequency weapons. When wounded soldiers needed to be carried through dangerous areas, he helped carry stretchers despite his smaller size. "Why do you keep risking yourself for us?" Zixara asked during a brief rest period. "Your species has no natural loyalty bonds with ours." Jiho looked up from the wounded Stoneclaw he was treating, his hands gentle as he adjusted the alien's breathing apparatus. "Where I come from, we have a saying. We're all in this together, or we're all alone in the dark." As the hours passed, something unexpected began to happen. The desperate defense of Sector 7 became more organized and effective. Jiho's calm presence seemed to spread to the others, replacing panic with determined focus. His ability to see solutions where others saw only problems turned a hopeless last stand into an actual fighting chance. When the power failed completely, Jiho showed them how to create mechanical traps using training equipment. When communications went down, he organized relay teams to maintain contact between defensive positions. When food ran low, he rationed supplies to keep everyone fighting effectively. The aliens began to understand something they had never experienced before. This small, weak human possessed a type of strength that had nothing to do with physical power. He could function without sleep longer than species with enhanced endurance. He could adapt to new situations faster than beings with superior intelligence. Most strange of all, he seemed to grow calmer and more focused as the situation became more desperate. "I don't understand your species," Groktar admitted as they prepared for what might be their final defense. "You should be the first to break under this pressure, but instead, you're holding us all together." Jiho checked his improvised weapon one more time. His movements steady despite exhaustion that should have dropped him hours ago. "Maybe that's because we've had to learn that survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's about being the one who refuses to give up." Coalition reinforcements finally arrived to find Sector 7 not only intact, but serving as a command center for survivors from across the base. At the center of it all stood a human technician, coordinating medical aid while briefing officers on new anti-void tactics that actually worked. General Vexter, his obsidian armor cracked and his pride in ruins, stared at Jiho with something he had never felt before: respect for someone he had considered inferior. The medical bay of Coalition Base Sigma 7 buzzed with activity as survivors from the Void Swarm attack received treatment. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the air smelled of alien medicines and scorched metal. In the center of it all, Jiho moved quietly between the wounded, his uniform torn and stained, but his hands steady as he helped coordinate care. General Vexter stood in the doorway, watching the human work. The general's obsidian armor was cracked in 3 places, and one of his forearms hung uselessly at his side. His compound eyes followed Jiho's movements with something approaching wonder. The small creature that he had dismissed as useless was now adjusting life support equipment for a wounded Velthari, his fingers working with the precision of a master technician. "The preliminary reports are ready, sir," Lieutenant Sujin Han said quietly, approaching her commander with a data pad in her hands. The human officer had served under Vexter for 2 years, proving herself through competence rather than physical dominance, but even she seemed surprised by the day's events. "Tell me," Vexter said, his voice rougher than usual. The battle had taken something out of him that rest would not repair. Sector 7 had a survival rate of 73%, Han reported. Every other sector suffered losses above 90%. By all mathematical models, Sector 7 should have been completely destroyed within the first hour of the attack. Vexter's mandibles clicked slowly, a sign of deep thought among his species, and the cause of this statistical impossibility. Han glanced toward Jiho, who was now helping a massive Stoneclaw warrior sit up properly so his rocky lungs could function better. "Every survivor points to the same source, General. They all say the human held them together when everything else fell apart." The general approached Jiho slowly, his heavy footsteps echoing in the medical bay. Conversations quieted as other beings noticed his movement. The human looked up from his work, those same dark eyes that Vexter had once dismissed. As weak now meeting his gaze with quiet dignity, Recruit Kim Vexter began, then stopped. The old forms of address seemed wrong somehow. "Jiho General," Jiho replied simply. "I owe you an explanation," Vexter said, his voice carrying across the medical bay. Other conversations stopped completely now, as beings from dozens of species turned to witness this unprecedented moment. "And an apology." Jiho straightened slightly but kept his hands on the medical equipment he was monitoring. "No sir, you don't. You evaluated me based on the standards your people use to measure combat effectiveness. By those measurements I was exactly what you thought I was." Vexter's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter, then explained to me how the weakest recruit in my training program managed to save more lives in one day than most veterans save in their entire careers. The question hung in the air between them. Around the medical bay, wounded aliens waited for the answer with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect. Even the unconscious Velthari seemed to be listening. Jiho was quiet for a long moment, his hands never stopping their work. "Maybe weakness isn't always what it looks like from the outside, sir. My people have learned that the strongest tree in the forest is often the first to fall in a storm, while the grass that bends with the wind survives everything." "Your people," Vexter repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me about your people." Jiho smiled slightly, the first time Vexter had seen any expression other than calm determination on the human's face. "We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, General. We're not the fastest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. Most of the time, we're not even close." He gestured around the medical bay, where humans worked alongside beings who could crush them without effort. "But we learn, we adapt. We figure out how to work with what we have instead of wishing we had something else. And somewhere along the way, we discovered that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in standing alone. It's in helping others stand when they can't do it by themselves." Vexter looked around the medical bay with new eyes. He saw Gorak medics accepting advice from human technicians whose small hands could reach places that massive claws could not. He saw Velthari engineers working alongside human mechanics, combining speed with innovation. He saw Stoneclaw warriors allowing themselves to be treated by beings they could accidentally step on. Trust replacing the old hierarchy of physical dominance. I'm restructuring the entire training program, Vexter announced suddenly, his voice carried to every corner of the medical bay. No more species separation. No more strength-based classifications. If this war has taught me anything, it's that we've been measuring the wrong things. He extended one of his 4 hands toward Jiho, a gesture of equality among his people that was reserved for honored peers and respected commanders. I'm also requesting you for my personal command unit, if you'll accept the assignment. Jiho looked at the massive alien hand, then at the general's compound eyes. Sir, the war against the Void Swarm won't be won by the strongest fighters or the fastest ships, Vexler continued. It will be won by those who can think beyond the limitations they were born with, who can see possibilities where others see only problems, and who refuse to abandon hope when faced with the impossible. Jiho reached out and clasped the general's hand with his own much smaller one. The gesture looked absurd from a physical standpoint, but everyone in the medical bay understood its significance. Welcome to the real war, Soldier Vexter said. Your species has just reminded the galaxy what it truly means to never surrender. As word of the day's events spread through the Coalition fleet, a new understanding began to take hold. The war was far from over, but humanity had just taught the galaxy an important lesson about the difference between being weak and being defeated. Sometimes the smallest voice could carry the loudest message, and sometimes the greatest victories came from the most unexpected heroes,